In this episode, we're learning how to die. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode, and today it's all about death. And the way I'm thinking about this is in two parts. We have death, we have the objective experience that's out in the world. Or another way of stating this is how do we reflect bodily death, like the actual characters that are in the game world? And the second part of it is the subjective experience. So what is the player actually going to experience when their own character dies? And in a typical game, it's stuff like, well, you lose control over your character because your character is dead. But maybe there's a death animation, maybe big letters pop up on the screen saying, you died. So in this episode, we're going to cover both halves of that death experience. And the first part of that is the death animation. And I suspect that one of the things that is going to set what we're building apart from your typical game is the unpredictability. What we're making, I don't want it to ever feel predetermined. Like I don't want it to feel like it's already signed, sealed, delivered. So in that same spirit, we're not going to have pre-recorded death animations. There is one exception to that, but you'll see in a few episodes. Otherwise, I prefer to ragdoll the character, which is fully simulating physics on the character mesh. In that fully simulated physics mesh, I think it's going to provide a more realistic death experience, but also that sense of unpredictability and openness that we're going for. And in addition to the physical animation, I thought about doing specifically death vocalizations, but it didn't pass the annoying test. If you remember from previous episodes that we've done, every single effect that we have in the game has to pass the annoying test. And when we did our damage vocalizations initially, they're still going to work when the player dies, but those were mainly to indicate that the player took damage in some regard. And in this case, the player's going to know that they're dead. So we don't need a separate death scream to tell the player that they're dead. But in addition to the physics animation, there is a lot of other setup that's going to go into this. So for example, we're disabling movement input. Also, we need to make sure that all gameplay abilities are disabled upon death. And for our player character, we need to make sure that the heartbeat sound that we set up back in episode 42, that fades until, well, fades out completely. And that leads into the final part of this episode, which is just going to be a fade to black. So you saw that on the intro. So the screen's just going to fade to black, and then obviously that's going to set us up for the resurrection. So let's get to it. All right, so first we're going to set this up for our player character, and most of the setup is going to be the same between our player character and AI characters, but not everything. So let's go into BP third person character. And on our event graph here, the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to make a little bit more space directly under damage, velocity change damage here. We're going to right click and create a new custom event. Add custom event, and we're going to call this Ragdoll Death. No spaces. And you're going to see why I made this an event rather than a function, because initially I created a function and then I ran into some problems and I ended up needing to create an event. So what we're going to do when this event is called is we're going to get a reference to our mesh, and from our mesh we are going to set all bodies simulate physics. And not the reset all bodies simulate physics, but down here, set all bodies simulate physics. And then connect this up just like this. And new simulate, check. And if you don't know much about physical animations, physics simulation, then what I would do is check out episode 44. We do a complete basic tutorial. So then we have to expand on the function that we created last episode. And that function was this assess any damage, but really it's coming from our event any damage. And all this functionality for damage we started back in episode 42. So I'm going to go into that, assess any damage. And the assess any damage function, the very first thing it does is it subtracts whatever damage was taken from our current health. It sets our new current health, and then it checks to see, okay, our new current health, is that greater than 0? Then go ahead and do all of our damage effects. But if it's not greater than 0, if our current health is less than 0 or equal to, then that's this false pin here. And that's everything that we're going to focus on this episode. And all that we're going to collapse down to a function by the end of the episode. But there's a series of things that we're just going to set up right here. So the very first thing is I'm going to get a reference to our player controller, drag that in, get. And from here, we can say set ignore move input, not the look input, the move input. What that's going to do is it's going to shut down our player's ability to move around, but not look around. So they're still going to be able to look around, just not move. So we'll connect this up here and then check this. And then I'll come down, and right from here, then we're going to call our Ragdoll Death event and then compile and save this. And we are actually ready to do our first test of this. Now, a lot of things are not going to work right, but in order to get the test as efficient as possible, what I recommend is back in our event graph. So we can take this damage taken and we can multiply it, just for now, multiply it by an obscene number. So basically any hit is a one shot. So I'm going to multiply it by 50, connect this up just like this, and that's going to make it a lot easier to die. We'll compile and save, and let's go ahead and test. And once again, we're going to wait for our AI character to pick up abilities, just like we did last episode. And then once he's done that, press V. As soon as he acquires a target, yep, he should be shooting at us. And why am I dodging? I mean, I'm deliberately... And there we go. But you'll notice I can still jump, right? Like, if you hit jump here, and you'll still hear footsteps. And you'll also notice that he's still shooting at us, and not only that, we have collision. Our collision capsule is still reflecting the flamethrower. So let's start fixing these issues. Really quick, the one thing I'm going to do in order to make our testing a little bit faster, even faster than what it's doing now. So V here, I'm going to get a reference to our AI controller here, and we are going to set current target. And the target is going to be, we can just get our player character, get player character, and this is just going to make our testing the most efficient it can be. And the other thing is not from AI controller, but from get actor of class directly. We can also set our current target car. The same thing. At some point, I think I need to clean these up to just make a single variable, but it's helpful to have both of these because I have some functions on the controller and some on the AI character. It's like one of those things that if I could do it again, I would do it differently. But my fault, guys. Learning as I go along. So connect this up here as well. Yeah, so just make sure get player character is connected up to current target, which is connected to your AI controller reference, and current target car, which is connected directly to get actor of class here. And all of this is just for testing. So compile and save this. All right, so let's go back to our assess any damage function. We're going to build on this that we just set up. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set our capsule component. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to set collision enabled to be false, no collision. So connect this up, and then that way nothing's going to be able to hit our character's capsule because our character's dead, but our AI is still going to be able to target our character. So we need some way of flagging the character as dead such that the AI can no longer attack. So what we're going to do to flag our character as dead is we're going to use a tag. Now I thought about having a Boolean variable. That's the way most people do it, but we're going to do a tag. And the reason we're going to do a tag is because we're already using tags to flag actors as inert. And why not just flag our character as inert whenever it's dead? Because then we keep it consistent, whether it's a pickup that's inert, whether it's a character that's inert. Inert just means it's not relevant in any regard to our AI. So what we can do is right click and say get tags here. And from tags, we can just drag out and say add unique. So this one right here, and then connect this up. And the unique tag that we're going to add is inert. One word, just like that. So compile and save this. And then let's go back over to our BP adversary AI character and controller. So this and the controller. And I'm going to go back to the event graph because on our event graph, we have this player scene function right here. And we'll go into that. So our player scene function, we're going to make sure that it's only player scene if it's not inert. So we can move this down. We did this before for other things. So actor is tag, and copy and paste that. Connect up actor here and make sure that tag inert is not true. So we can drag out from this, say not, and not this one up here, not Boolean here. And then I can add a pin to this and connect successfully sensed there and not here. So basically it's not going to flag our player as seen if that actor has an inert tag. Compile and save this. So then over to our adversary AI character. And the reason we also have to update the character is because what we just set on the controller, that's going to work when acquiring a new target. So it's not going to acquire a target that's already inert. But if the AI character already has the target, then we need a way of clearing that target. We need a way of saying, okay, it's inert now, clear. And really where that's relevant is this attack check function, the attack check that we set up over the last 4 episodes. And I thought about updating this function directly. However, we already have this target line of sight check, and this is being used by the attack check. It's also being used just for following our player character. And this is the right place, I think, to do it, because if this is already being called like every 0.1 to 0.5 seconds, then we can check to see, okay, is our target inert? And if our target's inert, then just clear the target. So we can go into that. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to zoom out because we're going to make some space in between the cast to actor in this current target car. I'm just going to drag this over. And as actor, we're just going to check to see has tag. So does the actor have a tag of inert? And then from here, we can branch. Say branch. And this way we can use this consistently for any target. It doesn't matter if it's an acquisition or our character that we're attacking. And if it's false, it means our target is not inert, so we can just go directly on. But if it's true, it means our target is inert. So for that, I'm going to get a reference to our AI controller. And from here, we already have functions for doing this. We can say clear sense target and another function, clear recently detected. Put in a little reroute there, connect these up. And then we're also going to clear the current target. So we can set current target. And this one right here, set current target, and set that to blank, just like that. And then last but not least, we can get our current target car, this one right here, and set that also to blank. So these 4 things are all going to occur if this is true, if our current target's inert. So I can move our controller reference out. So if you have those 4, if it's connected up from your AI controller reference to 3, this one is this variable right here for our adversary AI character. So we'll compile and save this. All right, so now this should clear our AI's target when our player character dies. So let's test this out again. And for this test, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get our air ability and I'm going to fly around and we're going to see what effect that has if we get blown out of the air. And you want to check to see your AI character can still hit you in air, obviously. But he's pretty close. Yep, there we go. And there's our next problem. So our camera, since we don't have a collision capsule, or our collision capsule doesn't have collision, then our camera has nothing to collide with, nothing to attach to. And, well, this happens. So for that, we're going to go back to our third person character, and I'm going to make some space just after set ignore move input and before the tags here. I'm going to make some space here. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach our camera boom from our third person camera to the actual mesh, because the mesh still has collision. That's what's being physically animated, and that's what's rolling on the ground once we die. So right after set ignore move input, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get our third person camera boom here, and I can drag out a pin, say attach component to component. We've done this before, and connect this up. And the parent is going to then be our mesh, because as it currently stands, normally it's our capsule. We're going to keep all these the same. Weld simulation bodies don't have to attach at a particular socket, and that way our camera is not going to jump suddenly when this happens. But here's the thing. So our player character could be in first person camera mode when this occurs. And so we want to kick them out of that mode and make sure they're in the third person camera. Kind of emblematic of your soul being removed from your body. If you remember that scene from Ghost where he dies, something similar. So anyway, the way we're going to handle that is we're going to get a reference to our TPP follow camera, and we're going to simply say activate. So activate that camera, connect this up here, and that's our third person camera that we set up all the way back in episode 5 of this series. Zoom out, make a little bit more space. And then we're going to get a reference to our first person camera, drag out and say deactivate. So no matter what, we're going to activate third person camera when our player character dies. And the last thing that we're going to do, so this is also related back to episode 5, because if you remember in first person view, whenever you turn the camera, it also turns the character. So we got to make sure to go back to normal mode where the camera is independent from character rotation. So what we're going to do there, drag out and say set use controller rotation yaw. So this one right here. Set that to false. Now, if you just have one camera with third person point of view, you don't even have to worry about these steps. The only thing you'll need to do is this. And then following this, we can just connect this up just like this. Compile and save, and let's test one more time. Well, that's embarrassing. And also there's a problem here, right? Because somehow our character is actually in idle animation. They're either in idle animation or jump animation. And I don't know what's causing this. Somehow the character is being brought back into their animation mode, even though we fully ragdolled the character. And I do have a solution to this, but it's not ideal. So if you come up with a better solution, please post in the comments below. What an embarrassing way to die. And so the way I came up with to fix this is we just need to continually call the ragdoll event, which is kind of tedious. But anyway, like I said, I don't have a better way of doing this. So back in our event graph on third person character, zoom out. We're going to come up here to the ragdoll death, and from here we can do a set timer by event. And if you have a better way, please let me know. But we could take our event here, connect it up just like this, put in a couple of reroutes, and I set this to be a time of 0.2 seconds. So 0.2 seconds, I got a good effect. And then that way it's also not too performance intensive being called every tick. So compile and save, test one more time. So now he's fully ragdolled, but the problem is we still have our cloud. If I press spacebar, yeah, we still have our gameplay abilities. So how do we deactivate our gameplay ability if we currently have one when our character dies? So back in the assess any damage function. So right after use controller rotation yaw here and right before tags. So I'm going to make some space in between these. And I'm going to zoom in again. We're going to check to see under gameplay abilities here, our activated gameplay ability. Do we have one? Is this a valid variable? If it is valid, so we'll do an is valid with the question mark. And then connect this up here. Because if it is valid, that means we currently have an activated gameplay ability and our character is dead. So we should deactivate the ability. So deactivate ability from our activated gameplay ability. Put this here, connect this up here. Now, if it's not valid, well, it's just going to go right on to tags. So I'm going to put in a reroute right underneath. This one is also going to go on there. So if you've got all that, then we can test again with our cloud. So compile and save. And actually for this one, I recommend getting your flamethrower first and testing it with flamethrower because it's going to work fine with flamethrower. It's just not going to work as well with the cloud because we need to come up with a way to disperse the cloud even when the ability is not active. So let's make him attack. Activate flamethrower. So our adversary AI character died, but he's got an activated gameplay ability even though he died. And you'll find that even if your character is the one who dies rather than the AI character, that you could still use gameplay abilities as well. So let's take care of both of those things. So for that, we got to go into our third person character blueprint under the ability can be activated or deactivated function here. And specifically, we have to go back into the meets requirements to activate or deactivate gameplay ability, the longest function name that we've created thus so far in this series that we created, I think it was 2 episodes ago. And I'm just going to take the bottom half of this, drag it down, because if our actor has tag is inert, then we're not going to be able to activate or deactivate. So we're going to say not Boolean here, add a pin here. This is connected to this, and this is connected to that, and last but not least, this to that. Compile and save. Let's test again. So there's still a couple issues here, right? So one is that our cloud doesn't necessarily get dispersed, and you might run into camera issues like I have here. So if I hold jump, the cloud comes back, and then if I release jump, then the cloud disappears. So let's take care of both of those. The camera issues first, and then we'll take care of the cloud. So what's happening with the camera is depending on how your character dies, the camera ends up, or actually the camera boom ends up colliding with your character mesh, and then it's stuck right there, like inside your body. And there's a very simple way that we can address that. So if we go back into the assess any damage function, if I zoom out a little bit, come over here to the left. So right before we do the TPP camera boom attaching component to component, I'm just going to zoom out. I'm going to make some space between that and our set ignore move input, move this up. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell our camera boom, okay, change the collision channel. So don't collide with the mesh. And we can look at the things that are colliding with the mesh by selecting the mesh and coming down here. And what I noticed is that one thing that reliably is not colliding with the mesh is vehicle. So if you got vehicle set to ignore here, that's perfect. So you take our TPP camera boom and we can say set the probe channel, this one right here, and connect this up. Change this over to vehicle, and that solved the issue 90% of the time, but occasionally I still found that there was a collision. And the way I addressed that was I just took our TPP camera boom here and I set our probe size. And the probe size is how wide that collision channel is. And I think the default is 12. I set it all the way down to 1. And that ended up solving the issue completely. So this probe size here, if you select TPP camera boom, it's this setting right here. And it says how big should the query probe sphere be in Unreal units. So right now it's 12 centimeters, so now it's down to 1. So compile and save that. So that solves one issue. We're going to test again just to make sure. And then for the air cloud issue, we have to go back into our gameplay ability, but actually it's the gameplay ability air. So I'm going to go back to blueprints here, into our gameplay abilities, gameplay ability air. And so the way I ended up solving that, if you go on the event graph and I zoom in down here under deactivate air ability, so we have this decrement air ability effect. And we set this up back in episode 39 and 40. Those were our air ability episodes, but let's go into that. And what that's doing is it's doing a function where it basically decreases the intensity of that cloud, and then it calls itself again. This set timer by function, it calls itself again in 0.05 seconds. And it does that until adjusted intensity is down to 0, and then it ceases spawning particles. But if we come over here to the right, so one issue here is that our gravity scale could still be below 1.7. So that's when our air ability is active and our character's floating through the air. So when the character dies, it's not necessarily having the gravity scale go back to normal. So what we're going to do is from our owner character reference, we're going to get our activated gameplay ability, get activated gameplay ability. And I'm going to move this over here. We're going to right click. We're going to turn this into a validated get, because if this is false, it's just going to check to see, okay, do we have an activated gameplay ability, which would be our air ability. Now, if it is valid, then we're not doing anything. We actually have an activated gameplay ability. But if we no longer have an activated gameplay ability, then what I want to do in that case is I want to tell the Niagara system if it's still spawning particles to stop spawning. So we'll do an is valid check on that first, and then it'll set our bool parameter to stop spawning particles. So move this over and then move this out here. Compile and save this. And the other thing we can do when we die is we can set our gravity scale back to normal. So if I go back to our third person character and then our movement component, our character movement, search for gravity up here, gravity scale 1.75. So we can just zoom out here, and right after I disable movement input, that's when I'm going to set this back to 1.75. So I'm just going to get a reference character movement, set gravity scale, connect this up here, connect this up here, normal gravity, 1.75. No longer floating through the air because our cloud air ability discontinued. So if you got all that on gameplay ability air, you've got this on third person character, you've got this, then we are ready to test both our camera and our air ability again. And so now our camera channel is totally fine. And we could still zoom out and zoom in. And try spamming any of the gameplay abilities below, 1 or 2, it should be red, and yep, we're dead. So now on to testing death with our adversary AI character. And you could test this by literally just fighting your adversary AI character in aggression mode, but fair warning, I'm only winning this about 1/4 of the time. I don't know what that says about my gameplay skills, but take it as you will. Or alternatively, like me, you could just keep them in acquisition mode, not hit V, and then it's a little bit easier. Alright, so we pick up our air ability, fire ability, and then poor guy. Yeah, so he's not doing so well. So we see a few problems immediately, right? He's doing all sorts of line traces. Yeah, so let's escape out. And we also get a bunch of errors here saying access none trying to read property player controller reference, set ignore move input. And the reason we're getting that, if we go back into our third person character blueprint, it's this right here. So this is only going to be relevant for our player controller. It's not going to work for adversary AI controller. So the way we're going to solve this, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We are going to make some space. Everything past set ignore move input, I'm just going to move that over. And we're going to get a reference. We set this up a few episodes back to whether or not we have a player controller. And that's this Boolean variable here, get player controller. And branch from that. Connect up this branch to this because we're going to do different things if it's a player controller versus the AI controller. So true, we'll connect this up here, and I'll put in a little reroute up there. And then for false, what I'm going to do is, if you remember back on our adversary AI character, so if we go to the adversary AI character, if we go to the event graph, zoom out a little bit, on begin play, so all the way down here, we have these two set timer by function names, jump and movement check and attack check. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause both of these timers when our AI character dies, because there's no need to continue doing jump and movement checks and attack checks and checking to see, should I go here, go there? No need. So we'll go back to our third person character, and what we're going to do is get a reference to self, so start with self, and then we're going to cast to our BP adversary character, not a BP adversary AI character, this one, and then connect up false to here. And so this is only going to be taken if we don't have a player controller. In that case, they should be using adversary AI character. And then from here, we can say pause timer by function name, and the function name that we're pausing, it's going to be jump and movement check. Make sure you get this verbatim. So what I'm doing is I'm getting under our AI movement here, we have our jump and movement check function. You can just right click, rename, make sure to get that no spaces back to third person character. Make sure that's exactly what's in here. And I'm going to do one more of these. So pause timer by function. Put in a reroute right there. This one up here, connect this up. Another reroute just for funsies. This one's going to be attack check, also no spaces. And the last one is from here, I'm going to get a reference to our animation blueprint. So get anim BP reference. And this one right here. And this is a reference to the animation blueprint that our AI character is using, because what we got to do is AI disable controller input. And this we set up, I forget how many episodes back, I lose track of these things. But if we go back into our animation blueprint, so that's under core ABP. So if I zoom out, this is on our event graph, and we have these functions for anim notify hard landing recovery, hard landing straight down. And we are also AI enable controller input, AI disable controller input, this right here. And here's what this function looks like. From our adversary AI controller, it's set ignore move input, but it's also getting the path following component and setting that not to be active along with the actions component. So if you got all that, back in our third person character, disable controller input. And then up here, we can put in a reroute, move that in, connect this up. Move this over. So it's doing this for our player character. It's doing this for our AI character. And then for all this stuff past it, then all that's universal to both of them. But then coming over here, I realized that all this stuff for the camera, so we don't have to do that for the AI character, right? So what I'm going to do is disconnect this. I'm going to disconnect over here by the gravity scale. So these 5 nodes here, these right here, move these down. This I'm going to move over. This is our gravity scale. And I'll move this back over to the left. Sorry about that. Disconnect this. And actually, I didn't have this in my notes, but I just realized, like, why are we enabling a camera for AI? And it didn't have any effect because we're not possessing the character. So let's move these down. Sorry, this is messy. We'll clean this up. Move these over. Connect these up right here. All right, so then move these in and connect this up. And actually, how about we do it like that? And this one will move down a little bit. Over here, move these over here. Connect this up, because all of this stuff, the deactivate active gameplay ability, tags add inert, ragdoll death, all this stuff we're still going to do for our AI character. We're going to collapse all this to a function by the end of the episode, but if you got this, so let me just go over it. So if we do have a player controller, set ignore move input, and then we set this for our camera, we connect up our camera to the mesh, and then we make sure to activate our third person camera. If we don't have a player controller, if it's just AI, then we cast a BP adversary AI character, we pause these two functions, and we disable our AI controller input. And then it goes on and it does the rest of the fun stuff. So it sets our gravity back to normal, it deactivates an active gameplay ability if we have one, sets tag, ragdoll death, yep, all that's good. So if you've got all that, then compile and save. And for this next test, what I recommend doing is get our flamethrower here, and we're gonna test with our flamethrower because we've been testing with other abilities. And there we go. So our activated gameplay ability ceased to be active. Let's see if we get any errors. No errors. But we still have an issue here. Our AI character, even after we die, still casting flamethrower. So how do we solve that? So we're going to go back into our adversary AI character, and we're going to go back into the target line of sight check. So here is where target line of sight, so this is occurring with the attack check every 0.1 to 0.5 seconds. And it's checking to see, okay, actor as tag inert, it's clearing our sense targets, clearing recently detected, clearing our current target. However, it's not stopping the attacks that are already ongoing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click and say, is our right mouse button active? Because if that is active, that means we're currently attacking. So I'm going to do a branch, connect this up here. And then what I can do is right click, get our activated gameplay ability, We're going to turn that into a validated get, convert to a validated get, connect this up here, because if we do have an active gameplay ability, our right mouse button is active, meaning it's being used, activate gameplay ability is true. We can then check to see, okay, is it able to be activated or deactivated? And then if it is able, then we're going to deactivate. So we'll branch, we'll connect this up here. And last but not least, from our activated gameplay ability, we will assess deactivate ability, this one right here, and connect this up. And the last thing I'm going to do here, I ran into some errors from time to time calling this function. So in the assess deactivated gameplay ability function, I'm just going to make some space right here. We are going to add an is valid check right before it. So many is valid checks, always going to be valid, and connect this up. Put in a little reroute right there, connect up the reroute there, back to the target line of sight check. And what I'm going to do is all this stuff up here, we are just going to collapse all this down to a function. Move this over, and this new function is going to be titled clear current target completely. So compile and save, and let's test again, dying with the flamethrower. Yep, cleared our target. AI is off and running. So we are all set with our dying gameplay mechanics. So now it's on to the last thing I want to do this episode, which is basically a dimming of the lights effect. And back in episode 43, we already started a post-process material for our player character. So we're just going to build on that. It's going to be a very simple setup. So we're going to start by updating the post-process material itself that we started in episode 43. So let's go back to our content drawer, back to content. It's under our MS presets, and we created that in the post-process materials folder here. And it's this right here, the M post-process damage. And what we did in that episode is we set it such that when our player character takes damage, it does this red border effect, boom, and it pulses with our heartbeat. So I'm going to zoom out, and all this stuff that's going with the damage effects, totally fine. We're going to keep that exactly as is. We're just moving this out here, and we're going to do another lerp, linear interpolate. So if you search for linear interpolate, you'll find it. Connect this up. And this lerp is going to go between whatever the post-process effect is doing for damage, but then if we die, it's going to fade to black, and it's going to do that based on an alpha scalar parameter that we set here. So the B is going to be a vector 3 or a constant 3 vector. So constant 3, and we're just going to keep that at 0, 0, 0, pitch black. And then the alpha here, this we're going to promote to a scalar parameter. So we'll just search for scalar parameter, and the name of this scalar parameter is going to be fade to black alpha. And by default, it's going to be 0. So I'm just going to comment this, and I'm going to call it fade to black. All right, so if you got all that, so all this stuff before, like I said, episode 43, all we need is this. So apply and save. We can exit out of this material. And then back in our third person character, we're going to create a brand new function for this. So plus sign, and we're going to call it fade to black. And I'm going to categorize it right now. So category of post-process. And we started that category again, episode 43. And this function is going to have a single input, and the input is going to be fade to black alpha. and it's going to be a float. And then we're going to get the post-process damage dynamic material, also from episode 43. And from that, we are going to set scalar parameter. And the set scalar parameter value that we are setting is what we just set up. So fade to black alpha. Make sure you get it verbatim. And then connect this directly there. Put in a reroute just like that. So the way I'm envisioning this working is this function is going to be called every single tick for a period of time. I'm thinking 5 seconds from the time that we die. And over that 5 seconds, the screen is just going to fade slowly and then quickly to black. And it's doing that by updating this specific parameter that we just created on our material. And that material is saved in our post-process damage dynamic material here. So now we have to call this function when our character dies. But not only that, we have to call it every single tick. So for that, I'm going to use a timeline. So if we go back to our event graph, I'm going to zoom out and we're going to make a little bit more space above these timelines, and right below Ragdoll death here, right click and say add timeline right there. And we're going to name this fade to black 5 seconds. So we'll go into that and we'll add a float track. So track, add float. And what I'm going to do, because for the first second or two, the mesh is kind of flopping around and being all animated. So I'm not going to fade too much. I'm going to wait for that to happen. And then starting around the 2-second mark, that's when it's going to really ramp up. So we'll add a key at the 0-second mark. So add key there. But I'm also going to add another key. I'm going to zoom out a little bit at the 2-second mark here. And I'll zoom out some more and I'll add a key. This is going to be at 1 and at the 5-second mark, add key. And I'll move this one up a little bit. So it's going to ramp up slowly and then quickly. So we'll right click here, we'll auto tangent. This one as well, we'll auto tangent. Doesn't have to be perfect, just something along those lines. And then this one over here, we don't even need to auto tangent, but I could just do it anyway. Then we can click the zoom to fit horizontal, and then there's our graph. All right, so we got our timeline here, and I'm actually going to rename this track. So it's going to be 0 to 1 in 5 seconds. Compile and save this, and back over in our event graph, we've got our timeline, and this is where we're going to call the function. So we're going to call fade to black, and we're going to call it on update in 0 to 1 in 5 seconds. Connect that up right there. Compile and save again. So the last step is we need to call this timeline to get it started. And when are we calling it? Well, we're calling it when we die. So back in the assess any damage function. And we could do it up here in our player controller up here, but we already have a bunch of stuff up there. I got another way of doing this. So we can just get our post-process damage dynamic material, and on the very end, we can just check to see, okay, is that valid? Because if that is valid, if we do have a post-process damage dynamic material, then we can call the timeline. If not, we don't need to worry about it. And so to get a reference to our timeline, we can go under components, under variables on the left-hand side, and look for our fade to black 5 seconds, pull that in, get, and we can say play from start. So we always want to play it from the beginning, but only if our post-process damage dynamic material is valid. Connect that up, compile and save. I'm going to close out of some of this other stuff. So ABP, close out of that, gameplay ability air, gameplay ability. And you know what? For this test, I recommend actually setting our damage back to normal. We'll do a normal damage test. So you'll see why in just a second. So event any damage up here, get rid of the times 50, or we could just set this to times 1. And that way it's normal damage. And yeah, let's go for it. We need to test our own death here, so I'm just going to set our AI to attack. Any moment now. So the fade to black works fine, but our heartbeat keeps going there. So how can we address the heartbeat? So initially for the heartbeat, I was thinking to myself, well, we got to go back into our heartbeat function and edit that, right? So that was the function that we set up back in episode 42, I think. It's under health. We have this player character heartbeat function. And what it's doing here is depending on our current health ratio, then it's spawning the appropriate heartbeat sound, and then set volume multiplier. It does all that stuff. But then I realized, wait, it's already figuring out what sound to use depending on our current health ratio. And it's also altering the volume and the intensity, like how fast that heartbeat's going. So once our character dies, couldn't we actually raise up the character's health? So even though he's still dead, the health goes up and then the heartbeat slows. And simultaneously, we could sort of fade it out because the health is going back up to full. So it gives off the illusion that the heartbeat is going boom, 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 and then fades out to black. So that's what we're going to do. I think it's the simplest possible solution. So over in our event graph, we're going to go back over to our timeline. And this ended up working best if we had a second float track, because we could tie the player's health to this, but I found it worked best if it had a slightly different arc, like an upward arc like this. So we're just going to add a track, add a float track, and I'm going to call this slow heartbeat. We're going to add one key here. We're going to add one key over at 5 seconds. Add key. Change the values over here. 5, 1. This one over to 0, 0. Right click. Auto tangent. But I'm going to set the tangent to go up. Something like that. And then compile and save this, and back over to our event graph. So we got too many functions open, event graph there. So all I'm going to do is under variables here, under health variables, we're going to get our max health, and we're going to multiply that by our timeline value. So connect up max health down here, slow heartbeat, connect up here. And from this, we are going to set our current health. So our player character is dead at this point, but we're just going to raise up the health back to full, and that way the heartbeat will slow automatically because we already have the setup to do it. So compile and save. Test one more time. A noble death. Heartbeat's going. Slows. 0. Perfect. So as we do at the end of every episode, guys, cleanup time. So back over to our third-person character, the assess any damage function. This monstrosity down here, we're going to select all of this. We're going to right-click, collapse to function. Move this in all the way over here. We're going to rename the function. Rename, we're going to call it character death. And we're going to categorize it, ironically, under health. I also realized that I forgot to categorize meets requirements to activate or deactivate gameplay ability that we set up a couple of episodes ago. So let's categorize that now under gameplay abilities. So we'll compile and save this, and I'll close out some of these functions because we got a lot of things open. So post-process material, attempt, restore, everything but the construction script, event graph, everything else, let's close out of. And then I'm going to zoom out on our event graph because all the damage related stuff, well, we're going to comment that, put it all together. So all of this, the physical damage, velocity change damage, and then this stuff, which is the death stuff, our ragdoll death, fade to black. And then finally, we've got some other timelines here. Last but not least, we have V. Make sure V is all the way at the bottom here. So up here under damage, yeah, perfect. So we'll select all of our damage stuff, C, and we're just going to call this damage. All of our damage stuff all together. Over here, all of our death stuff, we can comment that, call it death. And then if we move down a little bit more, we've got all this stuff, which is random facial animations. So all this, I'm just going to title it facial animations. Yeah, much better. So we still got a ton of stuff, but it's pretty well categorized over, what, 65 episodes? More than that. One very last thing, guys, I figured out after the fact why the AI character was still able to jump, because even myself with the player character, when I died, I was able to jump. And so we're going to fix both of those things. If you go back to the content drawer, into core, into BP third person character, and then back over to health and our character death function. So I'm going to make a little bit more space right after we attach component to component right there. So if I zoom in, yeah, a little bit more space right here, because what's controlling our ability to jump is the character movement component. If we search for jump here, there's can jump. In this setting, I wasn't able to reference at runtime. So if I search for example, jump, then we can get can jump, but we can't set can jump. It's not in here. But what we can do is we can get a reference to our character movement component, and we can set the movement capacities. This one, set movement capacities. And connect this up here just like this one up here. And then from here we can drag out a pin, and then we can make nav agent properties. And by default, when we pull that in, if we expand this, so can crouch, can jump, can walk, can swim, all of them are unchecked by default. And that's perfect, because when our character dies, we don't want him to be able to do any of those things. So up here, I'm just going to copy these 3 nodes, paste them as well for our AI characters down here. So connect this up here, drag this over, connect to there. So compile and save, and feel free to test this out if you want whenever your character dies. So compile and save your third person character, and let's close out all of these, and let's actually try winning for a change with regular health, regular battle, and make sure that our AI character doesn't cause our screen to fade to black. All right, I'm gonna full screen it. Let's go. I'm gonna go get the flamethrower because there's no way I'm gonna win otherwise. Yeah, that didn't end so well. Round 2. Fight. See, and I have an unfair advantage using our air ability here, but I don't know if it's gonna matter. Best out of 7. Occasionally you get these crazy critical strikes that, quite frankly, I love it. Alright, we need that flamethrower. It's our only shot. No bueno. I ran away, and I actually won. Look at that. And our screen didn't fade to black. So that concludes our episode for today. And over the course of our next 2 episodes, and you'll see why it takes 2, well, I'm taking death in a slightly different direction. So I hope to see you there.